In 1966, Carroll Shelby built exactly two of the most dangerous, uncompromising streetcars ever legally registered for public roads. Not 200, not 20, two. One was destroyed almost immediately in a tragic, violent accident. The other simply disappeared. For 40 years, the automotive world whispered about it, but nobody knew exactly where it was. Until a heavy, dust-covered canvas tarp in a private, climate-controlled garage changed automotive history forever. Under that thick canvas sat CSX 3015, a 1966 Shelby Cobra 427, painted in the iconic Guardsman blue, sitting exactly where someone had quietly parked it decades ago. The gray dust was so thick you couldn't even read the chrome badging on the fenders. But when a trembling hand carefully wiped across the original brass dashboard plaque, three words appeared that made every single person in that garage go completely silent. Super Snake, Twin Paxton. This is the incredible story of the only surviving Shelby Cobra Super Snake in existence. A car that borders on absolute mythology. To truly understand why this specific car matters so much, you have to understand what Carroll Shelby was trying to prove in 1966. The standard Cobra 427 was already terrifying by any metric. It weighed around 2,350 pounds. It produced 485 horsepower from a massive, heavy-breathing side-oiler Ford 427 V8. It could brutally accelerate to 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds. On hard, skinny, 1960s bias-ply tires, with no traction control, no anti-lock brakes, no computer assistance of any kind, Shelby explicitly sold it to customers who genuinely wanted a machine that could easily kill them if they lost focus for a fraction of a second. But Shelby, being Shelby, wanted to go further. He had a lucrative contract with Goodyear to develop their experimental Thunderbolt tire compound, a tire desperately needed to handle extreme power loads at sustained, blistering high speeds. To test it properly, Shelby needed a car that no production vehicle on Earth could match. He needed a monster, something so violently fast it would push the tire to absolute failure or absolute success, nothing in between. So, Shelby pulled two standard Cobra 427 Roadsters directly off the production line. He completely pulled the engines out, and his engineers installed twin Paxton superchargers, one massive forced induction unit on each side of the engine block, completely dominating the engine bay, both feeding compressed air simultaneously through dual 4-barrel Holley carburetors into a single 427 cubic inch V8. The result was a conservatively estimated 800 horsepower in a car weighing barely over a single ton. The power-to-weight ratio was simply incomprehensible by 1960s standards. It remains absolutely astonishing and terrifying even today. The first Super Snake, chassis CSX 3303, went to comedian and serious sports car racer Bill Cosby. He drove it exactly once on the highway. He reached somewhere above 160 miles per hour, felt the front end lift dangerously, pulled over, called Shelby, and begged him to take it back. Cosby later famously said the car scared him more than anything he had ever experienced in his entire life. Shortly after being returned and sold to another customer, CSX 3303 was destroyed in a horrific accident, taking its driver with it. The twin supercharged Shelby experiment appeared to be over forever. But CSX 3015 survived. Shelby kept it as his personal car for years. It passed through very few, very careful hands over the decades, and at some point, it entered long-term storage. Not abandoned, stored. Someone knew exactly what they had. They just kept it entirely out of sight. The car sat untouched in the dark while the collector car market transformed around it, while other rare Cobras sold for millions at public auction, while the legend of the twin supercharged Super Snake grew to almost mythological proportions among American muscle car historians. When CSX 3015 finally came out of the dark and rolled into our restoration shop, the air shifted. The first task was simply pure, meticulous documentation. Before a single wrench touches a car of this unbelievable historical significance, you photograph everything. Every aluminum panel, every mechanical component, every piece of original, oxidized hardware. The dust itself becomes part of the historical record. You are looking at 40 years of undisturbed American history, and you treat it with a profound level of respect. The tubular chassis was inspected first. The hand-formed aluminum body panels, shaped by craftsmen at Shelby American in the mid-60s, were carefully assessed for any structural concerns. The Guardsman blue paint sat beneath the grime in remarkable condition. The original bodywork showed minimal issues, a massive testament to how properly the car had been stored and to the brilliant quality of the original construction. Then, we opened the engine bay. The twin Paxton superchargers were still there. Both original units sitting exactly as Shelby's team had bolted them down in 1966. The cast aluminum supercharger housing showed the dull white oxidation you would expect from decades of sitting, but the mechanical integrity was all there. These were the actual physical components that had been fitted to the most powerful street car of the entire decade. You simply do not see hardware like this in normal restoration work. The massive 427 side-oiler engine was completely surgically disassembled, measured, and assessed. The iron block was sound. Internal components were documented against original Shelby factory build records. The goal throughout this entire restoration was never to build a better engine. It was to carefully restore the original engine to the exact, raw specification that rolled out of the Shelby American facility. Every component sourced, every tolerance measured, every specification verified against historical documentation. The Paxton supercharger rebuild required hunting down incredibly rare, period-correct internal components. The impeller assemblies were inspected under intense magnification for stress fractures. Drive belt geometry was calculated against original 1960s engineering drawings. Both supercharger units were rebuilt to original specification and bench-tested before installation. The characteristic jet engine whine of a Paxton supercharger spooling up is unmistakable. And when both units are running simultaneously, the sound is unlike absolutely anything else in automotive history. Reassembly proceeded with the same clinical discipline as the teardown. Every single fastener torqued to original specification. Every system tested in isolation before integration. The massive fuel system, the high-capacity cooling system, the ignition timing, all set to the original, aggressive Super Snake calibration. The twin superchargers were installed and aligned with the absolute precision the extreme application demanded. The first start of a restored engine is always a moment of intense verification. Either the thousands of hours of work were correct or they were not. There is no partial success on a first start. You prime the oil, you give it fuel, you turn the key. When the heavy starter engaged, the 427 fired immediately. And as both Paxtons spun to life, the violent mechanical roar confirmed what the documentation had already established. The floor of the shop physically shook. This was correct. This was exactly what an 800 horsepower Super Snake should sound like. Pure, unfiltered aggression. Chassis dyno testing provided the final mathematical verification. With the twin superchargers screaming at full boost, the 427 produced 796 horsepower at the rear wheels. Accounting for normal drivetrain losses, that puts the crankshaft output precisely at the original 800 horsepower specification. The power curve perfectly matched the projected output of a correctly restored twin Paxton installation. The ultimate Goodyear tire testing car was running exactly as Carroll Shelby had intended. CSX 3015 is valued today at over $12 million. That staggering number reflects extreme rarity, one of two ever built, the only survivor. But it also reflects something much harder to quantify. This car represents a specific, wild moment in time when one man looked at the most dangerous production car in the world, decided it was not powerful enough, and built a monster to prove a point. The fact that it survived 40 years in the dark and emerged with its original drivetrain intact is nothing short of a miracle in this industry. The Guardsman blue paint is polished to a glass finish. The white racing stripes cut perfectly across the body. The twin hood scoops sit exactly as Shelby designed them, hungry for air. The only surviving Cobra Super Snake in the world is complete. Some classic cars you restore to perfection, some cars you carefully preserve. CSX 3015 demanded both.